Welcome to this explainer. Right now, we're diving straight into a fascinating medical mystery of chronic decline and biological repair. Meet Jean-Francois. We've got this incredibly detailed biological intelligence dossier from a research firm called Starve the Sugar, and it outlines his severe type 2 diabetes, chronic fatigue, neuropathy, and get this, a hidden parasitic load. But here's where it gets interesting. Instead of just chasing symptoms, this report takes a totally different angle. We're going to explore how his condition was decoded and ultimately addressed through the lens of something called terrain science.
Let's kick things off with a philosophy that literally flips how we view chronic conditions upside down. The core approach of Starve the Sugar makes a pretty bold claim. They don't actually heal you. They state flat out that they aren't doctors, and they don't claim to cure or treat any named disease. So what do? They focus entirely on restoring the biological terrain. The whole idea is that a healthy terrain does what healthy terrains have always done. It restores itself. Healing is just your body's natural default state once you give it the right conditions.
So what if chronic disease isn't a permanent breakdown, but just a temporary failure of that terrain? That's the exact question we're unpacking today. Standard treatments usually assume a chronically ill body is just permanently broken, that you need lifelong external medications to manage the fallout. But this explainer flips that script entirely. As you'll see, this dossier views chronic disease as a temporary disruption. Remove the disruptions, and boom, the body can theoretically bounce right back to homeostasis.
And you know what? This concept isn't actually some new fad. We're talking about 160 years of biological science here, establishing that a healthy terrain is the body's self-healing default. Way back in the 1850s, pioneers like Claude Bernard and Antoine Béchamp were already suggesting that the environment inside the body matters way more than external threats. The dossier even points to a wild historical twist, an alleged deathbed confession from Louis Pasteur in 1895, where he supposedly admitted the terrain is supreme over the pathogen. The source argues this foundational science was essentially pushed aside by modern medicine in favor of treatments you could easily patent.
Okay, so what actually happens when this terrain fails? Well, for Jean-Francois, it wasn't an overnight crash. It was a 4-stage biological descent. Stage 1 brought the early warnings. We're talking a creeping 40-pound weight gain and a slowing metabolism. Stage 2 was the escalation, straight into clinical type 2 diabetes, complete with constant exhaustion and brain fog. Then came Stage 3, dependency, where he was relying on heavier and heavier doses of metformin. And finally, Stage 4, the breaking point. Total insulin dependency, 22 units of Lantus every single day, alongside the agonizing onset of neuropathy in his feet.
Now here's the absolute crux of the dossier's argument. Jean-Francois's previous treatments were forcing insulin into resistant cells, which actually worsened the problem because they completely ignored the root causes. Conventional medicine was treating the where, just managing the symptoms in the bloodstream. But pumping more insulin for type 2 diabetes, the text beautifully describes it as screaming at a deaf cell. The cellular receptors are completely jammed. The terrain protocol, however, pivots to treating the why by targeting those root biological failures directly at the cellular level.
According to the research in this dossier, his whole condition was driven by a specific triad of biological failures: the fire, the broken fuel line, and dead batteries. The core argument here is that chronic disease is the direct result of these 3 massive issues. And they don't just happen in isolation, right? They feed off each other in this vicious, continuous cycle that traps the body in chronic decline. Let's break down exactly what each of these meant for Jean-Francois.
First up, we have the fire. This is systemic inflammation. Think of it like an arsonist just pouring gasoline all over your cellular terrain. For Jean-Francois, the dossier links this blaze to a hidden parasitic load from a childhood bout of malaria. His immune system was basically stuck in an active threat response loop. This chronic inflammation churns out defensive cytokines that literally, physically jam up the hormone receptors on his cells. This fiery environment drives general systemic decline and is the direct cause of that painful nerve damage, the neuropathy in his extremities. The second failure is the broken fuel line, which means severe insulin resistance. Because those cellular insulin locks were jammed shut by the fire, glucose just backed up into his bloodstream. His cells couldn't unlock to let the fuel in, forcing a dangerous dependency on exogenous insulin just to survive. And here's the crazy part. The parasites acted as a glucose sink, feeding on that high blood sugar while his actual cells starved. So ironically, while his body was starving at a cellular level, it was frantically storing all that unusable energy as 40 pounds of excess fats.
And that leads us to the third failure: dead batteries. We're talking profound mitochondrial dysfunction. Your mitochondria are your cellular power plants. They produce ATP, and you can think of ATP as the biological currency your body spends to function and repair tissue.
For Jean-Francois, his ATP production had totally collapsed. This absolute energy bankruptcy explains it all: the crushing exhaustion, the severe post-meal fatigue, the massive brain fog. His cells literally couldn't afford the energy to just run his body, let alone repair his damaged nerves.
Because these three failures operate as a chain reaction, isolated treatments are just going to fail. You can't fix the fuel line if the fire is still raging, right? And you definitely can't recharge the batteries if the fuel line is broken. The dossier makes it super clear. One magical supplement, one diet tweak, or one medication is never going to cut it. To break the cycle, the interventions have to be carefully and meticulously sequenced to dismantle this pathological chain link by link. Which brings us to the dossier's solution, the 4-milestone healing arc. This is a sequential biological roadmap specifically designed to take apart each link in the chain over a 180-day period. We start with step 0 to clear the terrain, then move to milestone 1 to stop the inflammation. Next is milestone 2 to fix the insulin signaling, and we wrap up with milestone 3 to rebuild those cellular energy plants. Let's dive right into the specifics of each step.
So the protocol kicks off with step 0, clearing the terrain. This is all about getting rid of the parasitic organisms acting as that glucose sink and triggering the chronic immune flare-up. For the first 30 days, Jean-Francois had to strip away inflammatory food triggers by following a strict meat, salt, and water carnivore elimination diet. At the same time, the protocol uses specific clearing agents, things like ivermectin and fenbendazole, to disrupt and paralyze the parasites, while using binders to safely shuttle those resulting toxins right out of his system.
Next up, milestone 1, stopping the fire. From days 31 to 60, the dossier introduces a compound called BPC-157. This is described as a master repair peptide. Imagine it as a signal that commands the body to build brand new blood vessels, a biological process called angiogenesis. This pushes fresh oxygen deep into his damaged nerve tissues and systemically turns off the inflammatory fire in his vascular system, actively reducing that painful neuropathy. All right, but the fire out, milestone 2 is all about repairing the fuel line. Over the next 2 months, the protocol brings in metabolic signaling compounds like retatrutide to act as a kind of command center reboot. It aggressively clears out the cellular roadblocks, resensitizing those jammed cellular locks so his body can finally accept and process glucose naturally. This essentially rewires his metabolic software and is designed to safely walk back his dependency on those daily insulin injections, all under careful physician oversight.
Finally, milestone 3 toggles those dead batteries. During the last 60 days of the core protocol, the focus shifts to specific peptide combinations like MOTC. The goal? To trigger the construction of brand new, highly efficient cellular power plants. This phase is designed to halt that persistent drainage of cellular energy and supercharge sustained ATP production. It's all about rebuilding his physical stamina and finally lifting that crushing brain fog for good.
But hold on, there is a catch. The source material strictly points out that this arc only works if you understand titration. Because your biology is highly dynamic, static, rigid dosages will inevitably fail you. The golden rule here is simple: start low and go slow. You're looking for the minimum dose that produces results, not the maximum. You really have to learn the nuanced difference between normal cellular detox and biological overload. And most crucially, dosages have to be adjusted continuously based on how the body actually responds.
Applying this requires some really meticulous tracking. By objectively measuring symptom response, energy levels, and sleep quality week over week, you can safely navigate your biology and find your minimum effective dose. The dossier gives a heavy warning here. Dosing blindly without data is literally just guessing, and guessing almost always leads right into the more is better trap, which ultimately just overwhelms the terrain and causes a total biological breakdown. Ultimately, the dossier argues that for Jean-Francois, once the fire is successfully put out, the fuel line is fully repaired, and the batteries are recharged, the body naturally returns to homeostasis. It isn't about attacking one specific, named disease. It's about systematically removing the roadblocks so your body's native intelligence can take the wheel. By fundamentally shifting the terrain, the pathology simply loses its foundation and collapses. This dossier on Jean-Francois gives us such a fascinating look at how 160-year-old terrain science can decode complex biological failures today. It really challenges us to look far beneath our surface symptoms and ask some hard questions about how we treat chronic conditions. So it leaves us with one incredibly critical question for our own health journeys. Are you just managing the symptoms of an inevitable decline, or are you ready to restore your biological terrain? Thanks for joining us for this explainer, and we'll catch you next time.